natural area. And to get us in the right mood for this, I thought we'd start with a poem. Okay? Shirley's going to come up and do a poem first.
Since this is all about family, I thought I'd read Song for My People. This song is for my people, for the ancestors, for those who have crossed the river, the ones still with us, and the ones who now sleep. For those who guided us, who held our hands, and sometimes carried us on their backs. This song is for my people, for the ones who protected us, those who died by the hands of less righteous humans. This song is for my people, for those who worked hard and sweated in fields, who knew little rest, but could still find a song in their hearts, could still sing, dance, and thank the Lord. This song is for my people, for those that justice overlooked and right would not honor. For mamas and daddies, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, and cousins, always cousins. This song is for my people, for those who loved us enough to will us not to go astray. You better behave yourself, boy. Girl, stop acting so womanish. This song is for my people, for those who bake the cakes and let us lick the bowl. For all those who have the courage to tell the stories, play the music, and sing the song. For those who made everything just a little better for us. This song is for my people. And I am singing, singing, singing a song for my people.
Up there, Jane. Oh, thank you, Shirley. That was so wonderful. Greetings to all of you. I'm Cinder Stanton, and we are all so excited to share with you something about the Heritage Trail map, brochure, whatever we call it. And I'm still learning how to fold it properly. And I'm going to do a little demo here. Since our focus today will mainly be on the Union Ridge side of the brochure, you might want to fold your copy, I assume you all got copies, so that you can see the map. And for those of you who want to be oriented, can refer to the map while we're talking about different places. And the other side of the brochure is the downtown community of Star Hill, which is a walking tour. The Union Ridge side is more of a driving tour. And it was not an arbitrary decision to put these two communities together, because as Stevie Smith said just the other day, there is a human bridge between these two communities. Some people lived in one and worked in another. Some went to the original Jefferson School downtown, 5 miles away from where they were being raised in slavery. And some, like Berkeley Bullock, who you'll hear about, lived in both places. Many different organizations and individuals have contributed to this Heritage Trail map. Andrea Douglas at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center is a prime mover for this project, and most of the content was provided by members of an informal history group close to my heart, Central Virginia History Researchers. We know ourselves as CVHR, and this is such a generous group of people who share their research because they know that helping each other out and sharing leads to a much greater understanding of history and the world. So all hail to CBHR, and there are a number of you members in the audience today. That's great. It was more than 5 years ago when some of us began to do a bit of research on this area, the hydraulic mills area, in a kind of leisurely manner. And the discovery in 2013 of the cemetery of Jesse Scott Salmon in the path of the proposed western bypass kind of speeded things up for us. So research proceeded faster, and what we were finding and putting together, and I give Steve Thompson over here the major credit for making all of this visible to all of us through his incredible maps. We were just amazed at what was uncovered, a lost community that is now almost entirely invisible. It was a thriving community of African American landowners that grew up here after the Civil War, and bit by bit we filled in the map with the land purchased by the freedmen and the free people of color. And so on your map, the green, everything that's in green, was owned by African Americans, and most of it was purchased in the 20 years after the Civil War. At its center was the church, Union Ridge Baptist Church, which is on the cover of the brochure, this side, number 4 on the map, if you're looking at the map. And today we're going to talk about several different places on this map and several different families. And they have to stand in for the many families that own homes and land in this area. So, a bit of background. Is it supposed to be lit up?
I think when you click on it, it will.
Yay!
You might have gone off on that.
Which do I point at you?
3 o'clock, go forward. There you go.
Oh boy. So, background. From the beginning of the 19th century, there was a mill village at the junction of Ivy Creek and the South Fork of the Rivanna River. That site is now underneath the reservoir. And for most of the 19th century, this was the commercial hub of this immediate area. There were 2 grain mills, a sawmill, cooper's shops, stores, and even a post office. It was the post office of hydraulic, as it was called. And it was surrounded then by large plantations. These owners brought their corn and wheat to the mills to be ground. And these men owned people as well as land. There were hundreds, literally hundreds of men, women, and children living in slavery right around where we are now. And they suddenly became free in the spring of 1865. They now were able to legally marry, to learn to read and write without the fear of reprisal, to get paid for their labor, to own property, and to form their own institutions. And the people here did this remarkably quickly. There was a lot of economic disarray after the war, as you know, and this led to lawsuits and the breaking up of some of the big plantations, so that the freedmen sometimes stood in front of the courthouse downtown and made bids on the land that was being sold because of the lawsuit, or they could buy directly from other white landowners, and many landowners in the county were unwilling to sell to freedmen. But in this area, there were some that were willing. This is another map by Steve Thompson. This is also showing in green all the land purchased by the African Americans after the war. And I don't know if you can see the pale lines between, but if you can, you see that many of the parcels were quite small, 10 acres or less, but there were a number of large farms as well. And the largest farm of them all is where we are right now. Number 1 on your map, over 100 acres. This was Hugh Carr's Riverview Farm. Lots of you know all about this in Ivy Creek, but can't do this without mentioning Hugh Carr. He was a model farmer who raised corn, wheat, and livestock. He was the only black farmer in the area who raised tobacco as well. And he was the kind of figure that we've encountered throughout this research. A parent who was kept illiterate by slavery, who did everything he could to advance the education of his children. His daughter, Mary Carr Greer, was longtime principal of the Albemarle Training School, and his descendants were and are extremely accomplished. And right next door was Berkeley Bullock with a farm of 35 acres that's now part of Ivy Creek, and Edwina will talk about him in a bit. Now, number 6 on the map was the farm of Jesse Scott Salmons, and he was the son of the hydraulic mills miller, who also was part owner of the mills after the war. And Jesse Salmons was a leader at the state level, politically, educationally, also in agriculture. He worked all his life with the Republican Party here in Albemarle County, and several times his white colleagues nominated him for political office, which he never was able to achieve, because they thought he would be a good leader. But education was the field in which he was described as a shining light. First teacher in the Union Ridge School, later principal of it, and that school eventually became the Albemarle Training School. It's interesting that 3 of the most prominent African American educators in the county grew up close to the hydraulic mills. All 3 had to go 5 miles into town to get their first education at the Freedman School, now the Jefferson School. And that's Jesse Salmons, Reeves Minor, and Benjamin Tonsler grew up in slavery around here. Later the prominent principal of the Jefferson School. Anyway, by 1890, over 60 African American families owned land around the hydraulic mills. And a big question for us was, how did newly freed people buy and pay for this land when they started out with no farm equipment, no livestock, and probably very little money of any kind? And over, we learned that they were held together by strong family bonds, they had a strong sense of community cooperation, and they worked incredibly hard. In those first years in freedom, most of them had to continue to work on the surrounding farms of white landowners. And some, like Hugh Carr, worked for the men who had held them in slavery. Some had to live in the same quarters they had lived in as slaves and were separated from their families during the working week. Some could work for themselves only on holidays or at night. We see a lot of evidence of that. But they persisted, and they banded together. They joined forces to get and pay for their land, to build their houses, and to work their farms. And I'll talk about one family, one extended family, that's an example of this. And this is the Jones Crawford Holmes family, who were held in slavery on the Dunlora plantation. Another Steve Thompson map. Dunlora over here, hydraulic mills right there. And this is a plantation map of 1860. 3 Jones brothers and 3 of their brothers-in-law made the first recorded purchase of land in Union Ridge by freedmen. And this is 1866, 1 year after the end of the war. And it was an ambitious one, 50 acres for $1,200. They divided it in 6 equal parts. And it's clear that they worked with each other, shared plows, shared livestock. And they shared beyond their family because they gave a piece of their land that became the cornerstone of the whole community. The Union Ridge Baptist Church was built on that site, and it still flourishes today. These 6 men paid off the whole amount within a couple of years. And by 1880, the agricultural census reveals that they were raising corn and sweet and Irish potatoes. They had hogs and poultry, and between them, 1 milk cow and 1 horse. And I think I know who that horse was. Because in the late 60s, many of the Joneses and Crawfords worked on the branch land plantation. Here's the map again. Branch land is right there. You all know branch land on Route 29. And here's the Joneses and the Crawfords land right here. That's where they worked 6 days a week. And this farm was managed by the man who later became the president of what we know as Virginia Tech. That's John McLaren Bride. And his daily journal records what all the farm laborers there were doing, where they were doing it, how long it took them to do it. It's incredible. Here's a picture of branch land after the wheat harvest. But it reveals about the Joneses and the Crawfords that they took advantage of every holiday to do work on their own land. Billy Jones did not take a rest on Easter Monday, which was a branch land holiday. He hired 2 branch land plows and their teams for the day to work his own land and the land of his extended family. And one June day, he hired a branch land horse to work his corn patch, and that horse was bitten by a copperhead. And came back to branch lands lame, and Bride records that they rubbed it with turpentine, drenched it with whiskey, and applied a poultice of pokeberry roots. But this horse must have survived this treatment because only 6 months later, the Joneses and Crawfords bought him. $65, which was a lot of money then. And his name was Woodburn. So Woodburn was living just down the road here in the 1870s. Billy Jones's nephew, Robert Shelton Jones, worked after the war on a different plantation. This was the Wingfield plantation, Woodburn, where Hugh Carr also worked. And Jones was one of those who stood in front of the courthouse and boldly bid for a farm, $1,200 in his case in 1881. And this is the advertisement for that farm. His grandchildren remembered that he called his 80-acre farm Maple Hill, and that he worked for Wingfield in the day, but did the work at Maple Hill, as they said, by moonlight. And all of them speak about his aspirations for his children, his strong belief in the power of education. As a boy, he was sold south to Florida, and his new mistress taught him to read and write. In 1865, he walked all the way back to Virginia from Florida, except for the last bit of the journey. He had saved enough money to take a train for the last leg because he wanted to impress his family. Here's the diploma of his daughter Nellie from Union Ridge School in 1908. Jones's granddaughter proudly displays this diploma on her living room wall. And here's the Albemarle Training School, which began as the Union Ridge School, and all of Jones's daughters went to this school, which was begun by Jesse Sammons, carried on by Reeves Minor and by John Shelton. And in 1916, it became the first black high school in a 5-county area. Not just Albemarle, but 5 counties, the first time African Americans could send their children beyond the 8th grade. And really, there's an astonishing number of teachers produced by this school, both before it was ATS and after. 3 of Jones's daughters became teachers. Here's one, Nellie Jones, when she was teaching in Greene County. And the Joneses were noted for a family tradition of academic excellence, achievement, public service, all of that. They became college teachers, physicians, a Tuskegee Airmen, and the women in the family were getting PhDs in the 1940s. Truly amazing. And this is just an example. There are other families like this. So here's Shelton Jones with his daughters. He was remembered as fiercely determined that his daughters have a better life. And when he was asked how he survived the bitter days of Reconstruction, he said, "I could never give up. There were times when you needed a strong heart to see the sunshine in this country, but I always knew that sunshine was there." So this is just one of the remarkable families of Union Ridge. We'll hear of others. It's just a part of the recovery of lost places and of hearing voices that have not been heard in far too long. And now we hear from someone who has been listening to those voices and expressing them. I think it's Shirley, it's your turn, right? I got the order right? Shirley Solomon Parrish, descendant of another Union Ridge family.
Since we were going to talk about families, I got in touch with the granddaughter, Mary Carberry, and the great-granddaughter of Carr. And she just sent me an email with a few things she wanted to say, and I'll read it now. I remember my days growing up with farmers, but realized I should have asked more questions about my ancestors. I was too young. I remember Grandma saved every issue of Ebony. There was a huge collection on the upstairs back porch, and I would look at the pictures and dream. I remember going to Grandpa's office in the basement of the post office downtown Charlottesville. It was tiny compared to the White County agent, which was down the hall. They had secretaries. At 12 years old, I obtained my Social Security card and took private typing classes so I could become his secretary. I remember going to the civic club meetings in town with Grandma. Then we lived in the country. I think she belonged to all of the clubs. I remember playing the piano at Mount Zion Baptist Church for Sunday school. I gave a solo piano recital in 1956 at Mount Zion. I still play. I remember my brother Hinton, and I would sometimes lie on the front yard at night and look at the stars. I still like looking at the stars. I remember all the fresh vegetables Grandma would cook, and I remember how hard both Grandma and Grandpa worked on the farm, especially Grandpa. He loved the land and his farm, and he was excellent at what he did. Because of my grandparents and parents, I love to travel, read, and learn new things. This summer, my sister and I plan to go to Spain, Portugal, and Morocco to learn about the Moors, our ancestors. And this is a think most, if we knew her at all, we remember her as Theodosia. But she's Helen.
And pictures of her traveling.
And these are some other pictures of her in some of her traveling.
You want to click through? The one on the right at 3 o'clock, sure.
Oh,
Good. There you go. Good. One second.
I'll be talking about my family, the Solomon family, who own land where the Solomon Court Apartments are now. And that is Horace Collins Solomon, my great-grandfather, and his wife, Fanny Harris Solomon. And Horace was at Woodlands before he bought land from Arthur Jefferson, the land down on Hydraulic Road. This is the house that they built. The one here burned down. The family had different stories about what happened, why it burned down. Anyway, they rebuilt, and this is the house that I remember as a child. And I went there many times with my grandfather. We would come up to go to Union Ridge Church, and always we would visit with Grandpa's sisters in this house. And Grandpa would come up to just visit with his sisters, because at that time only 2 sisters were living in the house. And he would tell us, we lived in Stony Point at the time because Grandpa married a woman from Stony Point. So we actually lived in Stony Point. But at some point, Grandpa would tell me and my grandma, he'd say, I'm going up home. And that meant, we knew that meant that he'd be absent for a few days, maybe a week or so, sometimes. But that is, I do remember that house. And here is where you can see that Horace and Fanny have started their family. This is the 1880 census. And at that time, they have 5 children in the 1880 census. And Fanny must have been a very strong woman. She actually had children for a period of 20 years. She had 15 children. This is my great-grandpa Horace, and one of his grandsons, William Solomon, in the wagon. I'm assuming they're either going out to do some work or maybe go into town. My great-grandpa was known for raising hogs, and this appeared in the Daily Progress in 1895, telling about my great-grandpa, here it is, who lives on, he was living on Woodland at that time, the farm of the Honorable J.R. Wingfield, killed this week 2 mammoth hogs that aggravated 734 pounds. One of the porkers tipped the scales at the 392 notch, and the other pulled down 342 pounds. And this hog here was raised by my grandfather Horace. And you can tell that he probably got some good tips from his father. And I remember that too, that my grandpa, I lived with my grandparents, and I can remember grandpa having big hogs and, hog killing time and all of that. Okay, here we are on the 1900 census, and you can see the family has grown some. And I actually remember all of these children of Horace. They were my great aunts and uncles. They all lived during my lifetime. Of course, they did not all have the Solomon name by that time because there were more girls than boys, and of course getting married. So we have lots of different family names. This is a family picture at some event at the house or something, and here we have Grandma Solomon, my great-grandmother, and the rest of these are her grandchildren. And as I said, we have a lot of different names here. We have Marys and Magrudas and Boykins, and this is my handsome Grandpa Horace. Okay, this is my great uncle Horace. This is my grandpa's brother, Henry, and his car. I don't know what this is. Anybody know what kind of car that is? Anyway, in the driver's seat is his white Cora. Now, my great uncle Musto had a store actually on Hydraulic Road at one time, and this is it. And this picture here is also the store. And Uncle Musto was one who worked for a while in New York, and there was a terrible car accident in the Harlem Tunnel where he lost one of his legs. And I can remember him also, and the store, which was, done up and done better and got to be better. But he did very well with the store.
What is that picture? Hydraulic and what?
Oh, the store was where Georgetown Road meets Hydraulic, but on the other side. Actually, the Magruder family has that land now, where Gwen and her husband. Okay, these are some of the sisters of the Solomon family. This is Texana. Everybody called her Texas. And these two are the twins, Sadie and Mamie. Now, Sadie is the mother of the Randolphs, John Randolph, Barbara Randolph, Fanny Randolph. This is her twin Mamie, who was Horace Boykin's mother, and they have lots of, she has lots of grandchildren around too. This is Aunt Lily, another sister, standing on the porch steps at the house, which is was down the road on Hydraulic. She did not have any children, and she lived in D.C. until later on in life she came back and lived at the house with her sister, Texas. This is my great aunt, another sister, Daisy, who lived in Ivy, and one of her sons. And her children, she had 3 children, I believe, yes. And they all lived in Ivy. her last name was Smith. She married Smith. Onita Smith, who married, at the moment I can't remember who Onita Smith, but she was Onita Smith. And here again is that handsome man, Horace, my grandpa. I just really loved my grandpa. He told me stories and read to me, and I think that's why I like that sort of thing. And this is a picture of Grandpa Horace and my grandma, Alida Johnson Solomon, who everybody called Ladybug. That was her nickname, but everybody called her that like they really thought that was her name. I even found her on the census as Ladybug. That's another picture of her. This is the grandmother I lived with, Horace's wife. All right, and that's another picture of Grandpa out in the field or something. I'm not sure what he's doing out there, but maybe looking at the hog pen or something. And Union Ridge Church, and in the Richmond Planet, they had written a little piece about it. The installation of Reverend H. Palmer as pastor of the Union Ridge Baptist Church will take place next Sunday. The Union Ridge is the most beautiful church in the county, and a good crowd is expected to be present on this occasion. This church, of course, still flourishes. The minister now is another cousin of mine on the other side, all his cousins. Lester Smith, he and his wife Rosanna co-pastored now at Union Ridge Church. And that's me and my daddy. And this is a picture that was taken in Stony Point with Grandpa, my Aunt Gracie, my daddy's sister, my grandma Bug, and my Uncle Linwood. My Uncle David, my Uncle George, my cousin Marie, and that's me, that little girl there. And this is my daddy and his brother Linwood, who look like they're up to something. And they probably were. But anyway, you just enjoyed each other's, it really is.
When we were talking about putting this brochure together with Andrea Douglas, we were asked to name special sites that we thought were particularly important. And I raised my hand over and over and over to make sure that my favorite site, which is Woodburn Road, was included on this brochure. So if you are looking, it is number 2. It is in an area called Cartersburg, so sometimes the area is called Woodburn and sometimes it is called Cartersburg. You will know this as in between Berkmar Drive and Woodburn Road off Ryle Road. And Berkmar Drive hosts the Ryle Hill Shopping Center. And this is Woodburn Road. So in the 50s, a lot of this land along the road was was purchased in order to put the bypass place. And then at various times, the bypass would get resurrected, and then it would die out, and then it would get resurrected again and die out. And as a result, the area here has a lot of houses that nobody quite knew what was going to happen to them. They thought they were going to be torn down, so they didn't really do much upkeep. Nobody invested a lot, and there's a lot of feeling on the road that it is a little bit suspended in time, which is what it was for a long time. So I think actually, if you drive along this road, it is a kind of model for what things were, along in an earlier time. So this is my next slide. This is it. Okay, Jane.
3 o'clock? Are you there at 3 o'clock?
On top, on the side.
There you
Now I'm back to something I don't want to do.
Here. You want to go back to the beginning?
So, yeah, I do, this is like the fourth one.
Hit 9 o'clock. Go to the 9 o'clock position.
Okay, so this one goes forward.
And then the Lord
Okay, so this is the Massey map of 1904, so it's a little later than we're talking about. But one thing, if any of you have ever looked at the Massey map, you will know that they were mad about showing Civil War events in this area. So the Massey map has Woodburn, and if any of you have hung around the shopping center at Ryle Hills, you'll see it's a part of the Civil War trails, and it has a great marker. But the important thing to really understand is that Woodburn Road used to be the road that kind of was one of the main paths to go from Charlottesville up to Ryle Mill. So during the Civil War, these little dotted lines all over the Massey map show the different paths that the Union soldiers marched. So during the Civil War, let's see if I can do the next one.
Don't hold it down, just click.
Okay, so in 1864, General Custer was sent to have do a kind of diversion, and he thought there was a big encampment. The shopping center's built actually right flat on top of the Civil War encampment. It's not as if it was, over to the side. It is right on top. And this little area right here, you can read this, and in one of these windows in here, the Historical Society has a little more detailed explanation of the battle if anybody is interested. But the road from Charlottesville up led over this bridge to this, which was the Ryle Mills. And as Cinder pointed out, this is where people would come and bring their corn and their wheat to be ground, the mills in this area. So when the Union soldiers came marching across this bridge and down into the encampment, got startled and confused in here. Everybody, if you read the description of the battle, everybody was confused in it. And as they marched back over the bridge, they burnt the bridge. And this is a newspaper picture from the period, 1864. An artist who was tasked to cover the battle. And it was a railroad bridge too, very important for people to not have it be supplying the Confederacy. They also burned Ryle Mills. And the first thing, and then they retreated to Stannersville. And the first thing that the Confederates did was rebuild the bridge and rebuild the mill. So that existed for quite a long time after that. Whoops. I don't want to go back. This is very delicate. Really did that job. So again, Ryle Mills is right there. And you can see in this wonderful map, this is again Steve's map that we all use over and over again. This is Ryle Mills Road, this is Woodburn Road. So it was right at the edge of the hydraulic plantation, the Carsbrook plantation, and this, which was Terrell and later called Springfield Farm. As Cinder talked about, after the war, this was one of the places that people who were newly freed could buy land. And early on, 1873, Wilson Clark bought land. We see the same pattern here that we see in other areas where people banded together. And my feeling always is when you see a group like this buying a piece of land, you have people who are uniting in their land purchases so that they will know they can't be separated. So the big fear during enslavement was how you could be sold away for punishment or just because you were surplus on the property. So when you bought land, A, you were combining your resources, but B, you were saying we're together and we can't be separated. Other people who bought land, Jackson Goffney, Lewis Clark, Thomas Jones, Mariah Hare, a woman, Walker Jackson, John Keefe, Fleming Carter, Dabney Douglas, and the group of people that I've been most interested in looking into, Bert Overton, his son-in-law William Woodfolk, his grandson, and his grandson-in-law also all bought a piece of property together. So you have multi-generations there. This is Wilson Clark's signature on his deed, right down here. So as Cinder mentioned, there was a lot of illiteracy, not just among the enslaved, but also among white people. And when people were freed and could learn to write and read, this man practiced his signature until he could sign it clearly. And there it is, Wilson Clark, 1873. So 8 years after, less than after emancipation. He was also very young. He was in his 20s when he bought land. The Cartersburg community, again, as we've talked about, people were working. This is the 1880 census, and I just, zipped down a section of it because people didn't have big enough plots, and they had to work often as farm labor. So if you see farm labor, they were working on somebody else's farm, often the plantation that they had bought land off. Some people were farmers, just farming their own land. This person is a railroad hand, so also, getting a job on the railroad. One of the things you see a lot in the early censuses is the ability of a husband to keep his wife at home, like a white wife keeping house. So instead of a woman having to work as a domestic, as a cook in a kitchen or anything else, even very economically challenged families took pride in having the wife at home. Often one of the daughters would be out, working. But you can see, here again, here we are starring my favorite family, Tinsley Woodfolk, his wife Letitia, and he is listed as a preacher. This is 1880. So farmer, farm labor, railroad hand, laundress. Widows often had to become laundresses. That was pretty much the only job if you were not skilled other than being a domestic servant. But you could also stay at home. You could take care of your children while you did laundry, and you could also supplement the income of the family. Domestic servant, preacher, and there were blacksmiths and innkeepers in this area too. So now I'm going to talk about the Overton and Woodfolk families, and just because I know a little bit more about them. They were enslaved at Glen Echo, which is off Prophet Road, which is quite a ways away. Although one thing I keep realizing is the roads were so different then, things that may seem like a long way away to us now, you may have been able to go much more directly than, but the personal property tax, which is the first public records that we have of people, the enslaved, the freedmen with their surnames, show that William Woodfolk moved from Glen Echo to Carsbrook as soon as he could. So from 1865, we don't have a record from then. 1866, there's no location place. 1867, he was already in Carsbrook. And that is, this is the Woodburn Road area. So he is right already there. His mother may have been enslaved there. He was a blacksmith. He may have been bought and brought to Glen Echo. He married a woman who was from that plantation. So in 1873, the family banded together and bought this wonderful little chunk of land here. They divided it into, there were about 2 to 3 acre lots, kind of funny shapes. Gilbert Overton was the grandfather of the family. This was his grandson's Tinsley, his grandson-in-law, who had married Tinsley's sister, and this was his son-in-law, who had married his daughter Rosa. And I have to admit, at this point, like I have serious picture envy. People like Shirley and Edwina who have family pictures, because nobody in the Woodfolk family seems to have a picture of the Reverend Woodfolk. Pleasant Grove Baptist Church thought they had a picture of Reverend Woodfolk, but this is as close as we can get to a picture of Reverend Woodfolk. This is his very beautiful gravestone, which is in his family's graveyard, which is off Woodburn Road. And Reverend Woodfolk dedicated a big chunk of land for family cemetery. Along the road, many families had little burial plots, a lot of them in the backyard, just 2 or 3 people. And Union Ridge in the 1900s bought a graveyard, and they buried people on hydraulic, and J.F. Bell bought another graveyard, and people later on. But the Woodfolk Cemetery has at least 60 graves in it. So it is a substantial and beautiful graveyard. But there are only 4 headstones. Now we have to go back. There. So Tinsley, after he moved, he married Letitia. And Letitia was enslaved, if you look at your map, in a part that we haven't written anything about, but this area up here called Allentown. And although she didn't go by the name Allen, her mother was an Allen. I stuck it in there because I thought it was useful. But Letitia was enslaved by the Burnleys, along with her family. And the Allens bought land in Allentown, and her mother is buried actually in Allentown. So Letitia married Tinsley in 1869, very shortly after they would have moved from Glen Echo. Letitia's sister Lucy married Tinsley's brother David later on, actually second marriage. And her sister Elvira married Tinsley's cousin, George Overton Terrell, one of Shirley's many cousins that he talks about. George Overton Terrell was actually raised by William and Rosa Woodfolk when his own parents died. So he would have been more like a sibling than a cousin. And all the men became ministers. Tinsley first, David later, and George Overton Terrell immigrated across Nevada, and he eventually ended up in Iowa. And when he is in his late 60s, he changes his occupation from that of minor labor or whatever to a preacher. So all of these men became ministers, and their wives all became first ladies of the church. So the thing I'd like you just to see about this is, here we have Woodburn Road, and this is around the site of the Union Ridge Church. So if you lived on Woodburn Road, you could go that direction and go to church. But if you lived, on this road, you could also cross Ryle Mills and go up here and keep on going, and you would end up in Earlysville, and keep on going, you'd end up in Freedom. So the first church that Tinsley founded was founded right around this area, which is where the airport is now. And that church, you will probably all remember as the Pleasant Grove Baptist Church, started in 1875. This church turned out to be in the flight path of the expansion for the airport, and really, really sadly, it wasn't able to be moved and saved. The congregation built a new church on Buck Mountain Road, and the congregation remains. So in a sense, Pleasant Grove Baptist Church remains. But here is the first church, and this is actually the second building. The Pleasant Grove has a wonderful history harvest on their, that they published for one of their anniversaries. And they talked about the original church being just in a grove, and then there was a church building, and then there was this building. And they remember, although they don't have a picture, of Tinsley Woodfolk as God prospered the followers. Under the cool and steady leadership of Reverend Woodfolk, we increased in membership. Woodfolk led his army through joys, sorrows, and dangers, seen and unseen. Tinsley Woodfolk was clearly moving all over. I once tried to figure out where he was primarily pastoring, because he has wedding licenses of people he married that cover all the way from North Garden, Free Union, everywhere. He was all over the place. He started very early on. In the 1870 census, he is shown as being able to read, but he cannot write. By 1880, as we saw, his occupation was preacher. So in that time, he not only became fully literate, but he also became a minister. And he was active in the Piedmont Baptist Association and preached a lot of sermons. He preached to condemn people. There are references to him in newspapers, preaching another really good sermon. So when you go to the airport, you'll pass this tree. This tree is right near the site of Pleasant Grove Church and near the site of the African American community of Rivanna Station. And I'd just like you all to remember Tinsley Woodfolk and the community that was there. I think that the tree is a pretty good reminder. But I want to go and lead you on a very upbeat end. Gilbert Overton, also known as Bert Overton, one of the people, the grandfather who bought land, enslaved at Glen Echo, maybe even coming there from Louisa County. Gilbert was known as a stump preacher. So Gilbert Overton was preaching while he was still enslaved, and they were called stump preachers because they would just preach in the woods on a stump. It was not legal to congregate, groups of African Americans, so you had to be ready to move fast away from the site. But Gilbert Overton is recalled in a new book of family reminiscences as being a stump preacher that far back. His grandson then became Reverend Tinsley Woodfolk, his grandson David, his other grandson George, and now we have Stanley E. Woodfolk, who is the current pastor of the Evergreen Baptist Church downtown Charlottesville, and he is the great-great-grandson of Gilbert Overton. So the line continues on. And it has the story of Berkeley Bullock.
I'm not even gonna try.
Oh, no, don't even.
Jane, 3 o'clock.
Right. My time cut. Okay. Here you go. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about my great-great-uncle, Berkeley Bullock. Berkeley was born in Louisa County to Abram and Cynthia Bullock. Abram and Cynthia are both classified as mulatto in various censuses. Cynthia was said to have been half Indian, the other half some mix of white and black. At the time of Berkeley's birth, his parents were enslaved by Colonel John R. Jones and his wife, Jillie Marshall Jones. Abram was baptized at the Charlottesville Baptist Church at the corner of 5th and East Jefferson Street in 1839. And you'll see his baptismal record there. According to Edgar Woods in his book on Albemarle County, he said that perhaps no man in the county ever led a more energetic and industrious life. He was a merchant and magistrate and the first president of the branch of the Farmers Bank of Virginia, established in Albemarle. Colonel Jones also owned a 700-acre farm in Albemarle County near to Dunmore and Free State. That's another Steve Thompson. Maybe you should raise your hands. There you go. That's Steve Thompson. Okay. While in Charlottesville, Colonel Jones worked in the southern half of a brick building at Court Square that was known as Number Nothing. This building is also known as a slave auction room operated by Benson and Brother. Remnants of the auction sign is still visible on the side of the building. According to Woods, in 1814, Colonel Jones purchased the square west of the Baptist Church and built the brick mansion, which was sometime his residence. The house known as Social Hall still sits on the corner of East Jefferson and 2nd Street Northwest. It's now known as the Honorary Preston Corner Street. It is at Social Hall that Peter Fawcett, formerly enslaved in Monticello, taught Berkeley Bullock to read. Charles H. Bullock, who was Berkeley's son, reported in his memoirs that Peter Fawcett taught my father, Berkeley Bullock, to read and write by light wood knots in the late hours of night when everyone else was supposed to be asleep. They would steal away to a deserted cabin over the hill from the bee house, out of sight. Knowing how to read and write, and I will mention that when Reverend Fawcett came back to Charlottesville in 1900, he went to look for Berkeley Bullock, and he was away working at one of the resorts. And so his son, Charles Bullock, drove him to Monticello to see it one last time. It was 85 at the time. And knowing how to read and write was very useful in Berkeley Bullock's several attempts to escape the bonds of slavery. Berkeley Bullock also reportedly secured freedom for himself and his mother, Cynthia, who was my great-great-great-grandmother. When Colonel Jones suffered a financial setback and had to sell his 700-acre plantation in 1855, Berkeley Bullock was sold to UVA professor Socrates Marvin. Bullock's wife, Mary, and children were was sold to Dr. Charles Minor, and Bullock's mother, Cynthia, was sold to a man by the name of Grant. During Sheridan's raid in March of 1865, Berkeley Bullock and his family escaped slavery on horseback, reportedly. Bullock was later able, again, as I said, to buy his mother's freedom. As evidenced by Bullock's several post-emancipation real estate transactions and his successful farm operations, it is obvious that he capitalized on the experience he gained at and the connections he made while enslaved by Colonel Jones. One of Berkeley Bullock's land purchases included a 35-acre parcel of a 93-acre tract from John Shackelford for $435.50 in 1871. Hugh Carr, the guy that you see back there, his portrait, bought the remaining 58 acres in 1873. It is on this parcel located on or near what is now the Yellow Trail at Ivy Creek Natural Area. It's where Berkeley and his wife raised their family. The 1870 census shows that Berkeley and his wife, living with his 9 children, Berkeley's brother John, who was a widower at the time, was living nearby with his 5 children. Also living by was my great-great-grandmother Cynthia. The 1880 census shows that the 4 oldest children had moved out, and they had been replaced by 4 newcomers. It also looks like Cynthia had moved in with them, and Hugh Carr is living next door, and Rollin Salmon, the miller and hydraulic, is living close by. Berkeley's daughter, Fanny, and Rollin Salmon's son, Thomas, were real close. They married in 1881. As evidence of Berkeley's farming skills, it is noted that the June 1880 census of agricultural production reflects that Berkeley was listed as the sole owner of 20 acres of improved land, that is woodland and forest. The assessed value of his farm, including land, fences, and buildings, was $1,200. The assessed value of his livestock, including 1 milk cow, 1 calf, 9 swine, and 14 poultry, was $30. Bullock relied on his hens to produce about 700 eggs in a year. The census taker listed the value of all farm production sold, consumed, or in hand during the preceding year as $100. Bullock employed no wage laborers, apparently relying on himself, his wife, and children to work the farm. He planted 1 acre of Indian corn, which produced 25 bushels, 1/4 acre of Irish potatoes, which generated 6 bushels, and 1/16 acre of sweet potatoes, which yielded another 6 bushels. He also cultivated a ½ acre orchard of 50 apple trees, good for 100 bushels, and a ½ acre orchard of 50 peach trees, good for another 100 bushels. The estimated value of all orchard products sold or consumed at the farm during the census year was $25. The farm also included a vineyard, and Bullock sold 200 pounds of grapes, but he didn't make any wine. Bees produced 15 pounds of honey for the Bullock family, but oddly enough, no wax. Finally, the Bullocks cut 20 cords of wood and sold or consumed $40 worth of forest products. During the Bullocks' time in the Union Ridge area, they also contributed to the development of community institutions. Berkeley Bullock was credited most significantly with the founding of the Ivy Creek, later the Union Ridge Baptist Church. That particular newsletter was about Cynthia Bullock, who evidently at that point was living in Charlottesville, and she was interviewed by the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and she claimed to be 103 years old. At some point during the 1880s, Berkeley decided to give up the farm life, and he moved on to the big city of Charlottesville. He sold his farm to a George Mills, and he became the proprietor of a restaurant opposite the Virginia Midland Railroad Junction, about where the Wild Wings Cafe and the Amtrak station is now located. The restaurant was popular with both travelers and students, and he was featured in the university student publication, Horse and Pearls. In 1895, I should say that Berkeley's first wife died, and I think it was because of all those children and the hard work that she must have performed on the farm. In 1895, Berkeley married Harriet Fleming, who was the daughter of Beverly and Mary Kearns Fleming. Berkeley became a land speculator, buying and selling more than a dozen properties. In April 1890, he and 8 other African-American men, including my grandfather, William L. Brown, formed a joint stock company called the Piedmont Industrial and Land Improvement Company. The company's primary purpose was to purchase, hold, lease, rent, improve, sell, exchange, develop, and otherwise deal in real estate. In October 1891, the Piedmont Industrial Land Improvement Company held the first county fair ever sponsored by African Americans. And that's a pencil box that was apparently given away during the fair. While there is insufficient time to talk about the accomplishments of Berkeley's children, I would like to highlight his son, Charles H. Bullock, who returned to Charlottesville in the 1930s after retiring. Rebecca Hailstock wrote in the Norfolk Journal and Guide that for 6 years, Mr. Charles Bullock taught in the Jefferson Public Schools, resigning in 1902 to become the first executive secretary of the Carlton Avenue branch of the Brooklyn YMCA. After 4 years of service in Brooklyn, he was called to the Chestnut Street branch of the Louisville, Kentucky YMCA. After leaving Louisville, he went to the Washington Street branch YMCA in Montclair, New Jersey, where he labored for 19 years, and he worked in the YMCA service for a total of 33 years before retiring in April of 1935. And I can say that when I was living in Montclair at the time, and the first time my mother had mentioned to me before I moved to New York that Uncle Charlie Bullock lived there, and I had never heard that name before. I read the newspaper and they mentioned Charlottesville. I said, well, my goodness, I have my family right here. Of course, they were all gone back then, but in Montclair. But after Charles' retirement, he returned to Charlottesville, and they lived in 205 6th Street Northwest, which is in Star Hill, which is the flip side of that brochure you have. And that home is located 2 doors down from the Ebenezer Baptist Church. And they lived there until Mary's death in 1944. Those pictures of Charles, and that's Mary Pelzer, that's Lyden's mother, Charles' wife, and that's Charles Jr. and some other people.
Really noticed.
Okay. Berkeley Bullitt's life is aptly summed up in an article reporting his funeral, and it's held at First Colored Baptist Church, which is the First Baptist Church in West Main. It's conducted by Reverend Thomas H. Atkins, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, of which he was a member and deacon, and it's by R.C. Paul, Reverend R.C. Paul, pastor of the First Colored Baptist Church, in the order of Othello's, of which he was also a member. And it goes on, and it says, what we have not heard is that not only was he a restaurant owner, he was engaged in the wood, coal, and ice business, and fathered 12 children altogether. And that's what's left of Berkeley Bullitt's tombstone, unfortunately. And I wanted to tell you that I am involved in a project called the Preservers of the Daughters of Zion Cemetery. That's a panoramic view. What's a panoramic view of the cemetery? Okay. And so that's our Facebook page, and I invite everyone to please go there and read about some of the movers and shakers of the local area, especially Charlottesville. We are trying to restore and preserve the cemetery. And on May 29th at 2 p.m., we're going to have a rededication of the cemetery, and a city marker will be unveiled. And I hope that you will all come. Describe it to us. It is located at 1st Street South and Oak Street. It's right across from the Oakwood Cemetery. And that's it for me.
So that's the end of our presentation on this. As you can see, Edwina's relative Berkeley Bullitt goes on both sides of the brochure. The Stark Hill map is actually a walking tour. The tour of hydraulic is pretty much a driving tour. This is the only place really you can park, except at Union Ridge Church. But I would urge anybody to, of course, everybody I'm urging to drive on Woodburn Road and go slowly and look at it. The bridge no longer exists, so you go to a certain point and you can't go any further. So you can just look around, but you can, there's very little traffic on the road, you can go slowly. The cemeteries that are listed here, the Bell Cemetery and the cemetery for Union Ridge, are fascinating to walk around in. You can park across the street. There's a tiny amount of parking at the cemetery, really like one car. But if you are very careful crossing, hydraulic road, you can, go across and walk around, and you'll see a lot of the names that we've been talking about there. David Woodfolk is buried there, although the rest of his family is buried in the Woodfolk Cemetery. If you go to the SPCA and give a donation, walk a dog there, that was Tinsley Woodfolk's land. And so we have a lot of little biographies biographies of people. We're hoping to get a website up where we can add more, because you can tell that what we restrained ourselves to tell you is the tip of the iceberg of what we want you to know about these wonderful people who were, who really kind of, we keep asking ourselves over and over, how did they do it? How did they work that hard? How did they have the skills? How did they know what they were doing? These are our heroes in this pamphlet, and the heroes of this whole community area. And we are hoping that when you drive down Hydraulic Road and you pass the little dentist office, which was the video store before that, you'll remember Shirley's ancestors and her Uncle Musgrove's store that was right down there. And when you pass Solomon's Court, you'll think of, Horace's big hogs and enjoy that. And you will understand a little more about this area here, even when you're walking on the trails. It wasn't Horace. It was a community. It was this community. And this is the beginning of many brochures, we hope. Andrea Douglas did a wonderful job getting a grant for printing this. It took us about 5 years to do the research for it, but we are raring to go with other communities. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, yes.
I'd like to make a little comment. My name is Lucille Smith, and I just wanted to say to CHR, this presentation was incredible. Thank you so much. And also to Mr. Thompson, your maps were wonderful. And to your audio-video person, thank you. Over and over again. This is wonderful information. I too like to do this type of research, and of course I presented once with you guys, and I do research on the old segregated school systems, the 1- and 2-room schools. And not being a native Virginian, I thought Central Virginia was only maybe 7 or 8 counties. I had no idea it was 27. So I trampled over 10 counties, and I accumulate a remarkable history of these old schools, and this is wonderful what you are doing, and hopefully some of you can give me a little bit more information on the segregated schools, but thank you so much for what you've done. It's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for anybody who did a presentation? Yes, Lauren.
Is there any way that we could see this information again, like on the website, or will the video be available, or how can we refresh our...
I'm going to have to first check and see whether the video camera, the new video camera worked. And then we'll figure out what we do. I do think we'd be, there, so what you've heard today are some people who did some areas, and there are so many different people here. Different people contributed, their own history and research in various things. So a presentation in another place would have other people. We'd love to be invited other places and be able to share this.
I have a question, Edwina, I think for you. Where is the grave marker of Berkeley?
It's in the Daughters of Zion Cemetery, along with Benjamin Tonsler, Reverend M.T. Lewis, a lot of the people.
I'll be paying a visit.
Yeah, so please and visit the Facebook page.
Yes, Edwina got me actually to join Facebook, which I did my whole life, and I was talking about it at dinner one night because Edwina's writing up different people that she knows have been buried there, and there are very few grave markers there. So Berkeley Bullock has one, and Benjamin Tonsler has one that we actually restored fairly. Their city restored.
That was Fairfax Dale.
There's also one. They also put Benjamin Tonsler's up again. But there are a lot that just don't have gravestones. So if you know somebody who was buried there and you know a family history of them, you can write it up and it can go on Edwina's Facebook page, and you can find out more about the people who are there. So I wrote up a family that I had done a lot of research on, who have no markers, they have passed from the scene, they left no descendants, you know, but Edwina's got a place that she's keeping them remembered. And that's what I think this is all, you know, so important in what we're doing. Dee Dee.
I have a question for Cinder. Is Robert Shelton Jones related to Joshua?
Not that we've found, we'd love to find a connection, but not sure where the Shelton, his middle name came from.
And Shirley, were you the one that mentioned, or maybe it was Edwina, that was Union Ridge Baptist Church first called Ivy Creek Baptist?
It was, but I didn't
It
know
was,
where
it was first called Salem.
Salem Church.
Salem Church. Ivy Creek Church was where we went from the
Yes.
foundation,
Yeah.
and then the two churches merged to become, Salem changed its name to Union Ridge. And that-
See, I would like to second that the PowerPoints, the information can be found for research somewhere. That's what Central Michigan History research is so good at. Can anybody go? You want to tell people how to come to
What?
that meeting, the Central
Oh.
Virginia History, which I think of Lucille Smith here.
Yeah, Lucille gave a wonderful presentation on all the work she's done with the schools, Central, the growing state of Central Virginia. But CVHR meets monthly at the Jefferson School, is it the first Thursday of the month?
Yes.
4 p.m., it's 4 to 6, basically, and anybody's welcome. We have usually a different speaker every month, and sometimes when I fail to find a speaker, we talk among ourselves, which is a lot of fun. It's a wonderful, wonderful group.
How do they get on your email distribution?
You can tell me what your email address is, and I add you. We have 115 on the email loop right now.
So we have refreshments for everybody over here, and if you have any more questions for anybody, you can just find us, but we would love to see you at the Daughters of Zion dedication, May the 29th. And if you're interested in the CDHR meetings, they're truly fascinating. Bruce's brother, John Austin, used to come to our meetings, and we go around the group, and everybody says why they're there often. And we came to John, and he said, I'm not doing any history research. I'm not doing anything except this is the best, most interesting meeting in town. So it is. And it is also the most generous group of people, and special kudos to Steve Thompson and Bob Vernon, both of whom made us wonderful maps all the time. Special maps for, everybody's little land pieces and how it all integrates, and we just everybody shares everything. So thank you all very much for coming, and please do celebrate Valentine's Day by having some food.